Good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Hadfield, one of the associate pastors here.
And I'm Betsy Valentine.
And Betsy Valentine.
And I'm a member here, so there you go.
Longtime member.
Long time.
And Betsy's husband, David, was a pastor at PCUSA. He
was ordained here.
Yeah. So Betsy is here to present the first of 3 sessions on exploring our Christian faith through Indigenous people's perspective. And certainly fitting as we are kind of heading into that time of thinking about Indigenous People Day or Columbus Day, the Thanksgiving, the bounty of this remarkable country and providing for not only us, but those who have come before us, and how our Christian faith has intersected that, and what we can learn from our mistakes in history too, and certainly some opportunities for confession of the ways, the missteps, and the harm that we did as we came to this country. So let me open us in prayer, and then Betsy will go ahead and get started. Let's pray. Creator God, we give you thanks for the bounty of this earth, for the abundance that we encounter in our nation. We pray for Indigenous people, for Native Americans, that you will continue to journey with them and help us to have open eyes, hearts, and minds as Betsy presents these 3 sessions, that we could come to greater understanding of our Christian faith in this context. We thank you for Betsy, for her gifts and her generosity in sharing them with us. We ask you now, oh God, to be with us in this time. Send your spirit. We pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for coming. Wasn't sure anybody was going to show up, so thank you. I taught school for 37 years, but when you're talking to your peers, it's a whole different ballgame. So I'm a little nervous. And plus the technology, as I was talking about, I'm so not familiar with the technology. It was a collaboration between myself and my daughter. She knows the technology, and I mean, literally, we did this. We did this remotely almost in a way. We were together, but then I had to go home last night, and I called her, and we got on a Zoom call, and she's doing it on her screen. And it was amazing. It's stunning. It's stunning. You know, I'm the old overhead projector and the ditto machine person.
Betsy, remember, you do have 4 people on the screen here.
Yes, I do, and I thank you and welcome to you guys too. I know I've talked to Ann and Lori. Follensby's hi, Lou, and Betty Ann, hi. So thank you for coming also. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself in this. I've had this desire to explore this topic for a long time, and I keep, it's one of those things that's like nagging in the back of your head. I keep putting it off. So I finally decided last year that I really kind of needed to do that, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing for the next 3 times. Today, you're going to be listening to me, and I'm talking about the doctrine of discovery. And I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. Some people are, some people aren't. It was something that was not really taught in school. We didn't really get this in history class. I certainly didn't. And it was a stunner to me when I sort of got hit with it over the head. I went on a Native American tour with the Mennonite Church a few years ago. And the first couple days, it was like a 5-day experience. And the first one was spent all on the doctrine of discovery, which was completely a stunner, presented by Mennonites who were very concerned, but also by Native Americans, and wound up at the Museum of the American Indian Native American down in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to give you an overview of what is on the PCUSA site. Some of you may be familiar with that. I'm not sure, but you can get this if you're really interested. You can go on the website for PCUSA, and you can find this document. Okay, so I'm giving you a summary and an overview. I've rearranged a little bit, so bear with me on that. So that's me today. Now, next week, you are going to be very lucky because Catherine Quillman is coming. She's an author, a local person who's written quite a few books. I think I left the one book at home on the Brandywine battlefield. But I met her this summer. She lives down in Chadds Ford and was on the Chadds Ford Historical Society, very involved in all that. And is going to give you a whole discussion about Indian Hannah, who supposedly was the last of Lenape in this area. Not necessarily. I've read some books about it. This is a book, A Lenape Among the Quakers, which is about her. I have a bunch of books up here too. You're welcome to look at them. This was a picture that was drawn by Barry Lee, and this is Turtle Island. You can see the turtle. North Americans, Indians refer to North America as Turtle Island. I don't know if you've ever heard that or not, but they do. And so you can see all the various tribes here that he painted, and you can see how the turtle is swimming. There's a sky and a sea. So it's a pretty cool piece that I picked up. Actually to powwow. I did. He's a really cool guy, and I picked this up. So you're welcome to come and take a look at it closer if you'd like after we're done. But Catherine's going to be here, and she'll be great, and she'll be really better at this than I am because she's done it before. I will be back on deck on the 24th, and we're going to talk about lament and apology and reparation because we really need to talk about that. We really need to discuss about grieving some of this stuff. These people have been, what happened was pretty bad. And as Christians, we need to learn what lament is all about and how we can begin apology and how we can begin to really heal, because that's what lament is all about. If you've lost anybody, you know. Okay, so that's what we're doing. That's an overview of the next 3 sessions. I'm going to tell you a little personal story and why I'm interested in this. When I was a kid, I went upstairs in the attic, and my mother had we had colored paper in the attic, and I had pulled some out for an art project, and underneath it was this great big cardboard box. Remember how, at John Wanamaker's or Best & Company, you used to get your dresses or your clothes in a big cardboard box? Well, there it was. And I opened this and found some things. And I didn't know what they were. I was probably in about 2nd grade and looked in there and was like, what the heck is this stuff? Where did this come from? And I came to ask my mother, and she says, oh, it's from your father's side of the family from out west. Whatever, because my dad was born in Seattle, okay? And I'll tell you a little bit about me because of that. So Dad was born in Seattle, and here was this stuff that was in this box. And I said to him, what is this? He says, well, it's from my great uncle, A. Lou. I'm like, okay. So what's the story on that? Well, as I got older, I found out more about the story. What happened was, as we all are immigrants, right? His side of the family came from that Russia/Poland kind of area, where the borders went back and forth historically, and came across to New York. They were Jews. They were the Cohens, and they came across to New York City as cigar makers. And then they moved. As westward expansion was, they went to Pittsburgh, Kansas, where I've been actually. I've seen some of that. Kind of interesting. They developed not just cigars, but they also had a store, because Jews are merchants a lot of times, and they were. And so some of them left there, Pittsburgh, went up into Iowa, and crossed into Seattle, because this is part of the gold rush time. And if you know anything about the gold rush, you know that if you were going to go there, you had to have you had to have a ton of goods. That's the way it was described. And so they hooked up with the people called the Gottsteins, which is the other part of the family. And the Gottsteins had a whole store going, and they outfitted all the gold miners from the leap off in Seattle to Alaska. So they weren't going to Alaska to get the gold, but they were making money off the guys that were doing this. Okay, so anyway, this great uncle was not doing that part. What he did was he went as an Indian agent, and he worked for the government, and he went to the reservations, and my dad called him a peddler. Well, he was selling stuff. He probably had a covered wagon kind of situation, and he was selling stuff to the Indians that they were, quote, allowed to have, because they weren't allowed to have some stuff like weapons, and probably food and stuff like that. Well, he picked up these things, and that's what this was, which who knew? Now, interestingly enough, he picked this piece up right here, and I got in a little closer to it so you can see the beadwork. It's kind of amazing. I had somebody look at this, and they said it's from that reservation late 1800s, 1880s-ish time. And I have this at my house. The fringe is all kind of crinkled up. I have not restored it. I haven't touched it. It stays in a cabinet that's in the darkness. I don't mess with it. But if you can see this inscription here, it's done in the old, the dip the ink and the pen and the ink thing. It's that, and it says Shadron, Nebraska, March 88, not 1988. 1888, Chief Red Cloud to A. Lou Cohen, okay, who was my relative. And so I had always thought this was a quiver. And when I went on this North American tour, I get there and I'm telling this one woman who I became friends with, who's Lakota. We went to the museum and we got up the third floor where all the Lakota stuff is, which was really cool if you've ever been there. And she goes, oh, that's, they've got these big paintings on the wall of the faces of these people who are real. She goes, that's my Aunt Sally, and that's my Uncle Jim. And they're all her relatives that are on these walls. Well, anyway, in this room on the third floor, there's this big plexiglass cabinet that kind of has a slant inside with this thing hanging on the, and I'm going, oh, and they are peace pipe bags. So this pipe was the peace pipe that was in the bag. I don't have that. My uncle came from Europe. He took some stuff. I don't have the vest anymore, but my cousin sent me pictures. That's the pipe and the vest. Okay, I have the moccasins, and I have the bag. And I'm not giving it to a museum because it was given to my relative, and I feel entitled to keep it. I'm not messing with it, not trying to restore it, and I'll never sell it. It'll get passed down like it was passed to me. But that's the story because I revere it. So that's my story, and that's how I kind of as a kid, got interested in this subject. Didn't really know where I was going with it. But I thought, I want to learn more about it. And from that tour and from some other things that I've done, I started saying, okay, so I'm conflicted here because I know what a terrible story has occurred in our history in the last, 100 years, but really 300 or 400 years. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I investigated this report to the 223rd General Assembly in 2018, and I'll read this to you. It says, the 222nd General Assembly, 2016, the Presbyterian Church adopted recommendations for the action on the doctrine of discovery. Recommendation 7 of item, this is how this all goes in Presbyterian. Calls upon PCUSA to confess its complicity and repudiate the doctrine of discovery and direct the Presbyterian Mission Agency and the Office of the General Assembly in consultation with Advisory Committee on Racial and Ethnic Concerns to initiate a process of review of the doctrine of discovery. And then they talk about what it's going to do. A process is in preparation. That report describes the doctrine of discovery and explains its history, makes recommendations of how congregations of PCUSA can support Native Americans in their ongoing efforts, and describes how relationships with specific Native American individuals and tribes can be developed. And 4, suggests specific ways which congregations may recognize, support, and cooperate. Now, you know the Presbyterian Church as well as I do, right? You got to form a committee to just figure out what you're actually talking about, which is what they did. So how did this take so long from 2018 to 2003? 2023, it's because they have to form a committee, they have to go through the process. Well, we all understand that. So, as Presbyterians, so the 212th in 2000 had a piece that was called The Mission and Ministry with Native Peoples, a historical survey of the last 3 centuries. If you can imagine that. Must have been quite a thing. And the task force was formed for 200 years. This is what it says. For 200 years, Presbyterians have been in relationship with Native American people. We've been active in the formation and implementation of government policies affecting Native peoples, and we really were. We were very implicit with this. Because U.S. land policies have focused on land rights, our work was linked to Native American land issues. And that's what we're going to talk about, because the doctrine of discovery is all about land. Okay? It's all about ownership of land. The conversation will always involve a discussion of native lands, as the doctrine has been central and part of U.S. law regarding tribal lands. The Presbyterian Church has played a major role historically in this implementation. Okay, and we're talking about through its mission work, and we also did this outside of the United States. We also went to other countries where indigenous people were, and we did this there too. So we went to Africa, we went to South America, we went to Asia, we went all over the place, and we did a lot of this. And we were very involved in a lot of times thinking we were doing good when really we were not. We were sort of moving the way forward for other people to come in and do other things. So we weren't always doing such good stuff, although we thought we were. And we're not the only ones. The Catholic Church was real involved in this. So don't just I won't just let the Catholic Church off the hook here, because they were pretty darn involved in that too. Okay, so so the mission work throughout the world, the Presbyterian Church, relationships with indigenous people. And it's important that we have an understanding of the origins of modern day manifestations of the doctrine to understand its impact and on how we can support Native Americans. So we're doing a lot of that today. If you look through any or you look through a lot of what comes out of General Assembly, those congregations are very well represented, and which is cool. I mean, we could have a relationship with a church that is Native. Very much Westminster could definitely have that. And I've often thought, we've gone to Honduras a lot to do the water, and that's wonderful, and I'm really glad we're doing that. But we can also do some outreach in our own country, because there's a lot of need in our own country, and there are Native churches that could be very well, we could really support. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this is where I start to get my my order of things here going. We're going to talk about what the doctrine of discovery is. Well, it was Pope Nicholas in 1455. These are all these edicts. The Catholic Church came out with different edicts that would say all kinds of, all kinds of laws. These were papal bells, okay? These were all papal bells. And so what the summary of that is, we therefore weighing all singular and the premises with due meditation, and noting that since we are formally by other letters of our granted among other things free and ample faculty to the aforesaid King Alfonso, the Catholic kings and princes must invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, those are the Muslims, and pagans, whatsoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable goods, whatever held and possessed by them, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and other enemies of Christ, wherever placed, and reduce their possessions and goods and convert them to his use and profit. So in other words, you can go and take whatever you want with people who are non-believers. You can go take that stuff because they are not Christians. You can imagine what this meant. If they were not a Christian, and they, when Columbus came here, and he met these people who welcomed him with open arms, by the way, the Tanos people. They were very welcoming and open to him. And he was, if you've read any of the history about Columbus, you know how bad he was. He was a horrible, heartless man. He was conscripted by Isabella and Ferdinand, and that there's a reason for that, which I'll go into here in a minute. But it was terrible what he did, and murdered thousands and thousands of people. So he was given the license by the popes to go do that. This is this inner Caerta. I think I'm saying that right. Am I saying that right? Anybody? This was 1493, Pope Alexander. Now the next pope comes in, and what does he say? Well, he says, this calls for the propagation of Christian doctrine for dominion and subjugation of non-Christian people in their lands. The Christian religion and Catholic faith were to be exalted everywhere and spread, including the barbarous nations. She said as she clicked the thing, and it didn't. Oops, because I'm on the wrong thing. It established a line from the Arctic pole to the Antarctic pole, dividing the world in half. How do you like that? If any lands to the west of this line were found and to be found, discovered and to be discovered by a Christian prince, then this land belonged to the discoverer. This is Christopher Columbus. Okay? So in other words, this line was drawn, and so it's, the Christians, you can take whatever you want, and because these people are infidels. And this was part of what the Crusades was built on, remember? Crusades went for a long time, and it was all about the infidels, Who were the infidels? Muslims, okay, the Arabs. These bulls advocated enslavement and other crimes against humanity. They justified the genocide of indigenous people of the Americas, imposing and forcing Christianity upon them, making war on them and terrorizing, enslaving them. It was really a gruesome, terrible thing that happened, okay? We really have to look back at history and understand what that was. I have this particular paper that goes through it. The thing from the Presbyterian Church goes through, it's amazing what they discuss. And you can find a lot out about it if you're interested in reading more about, just Google the doctrine of discovery. You'll be amazed at what comes up. So we have these papal bulls from 1455, 1493, and 1494. They also, this Subliminus Dei, the exalted God, this enables the evangelism of indigenous peoples as the Great Commission of when Christ said, "Go ye and teach all nations." So they used a lot of biblical text to justify what they wanted to do. And remember, this is political. This is political, and this is for wealth. A lot of this. This is not because they necessarily have this great Christian, thought process. This is about enabling kings and principalities to go, take. Now it's thought throughout the now it is thought that indigenous peoples can understand the faith and what they should be converted to, the word of God, by the example of good and holy living. Kind of have that, if you convert, okay, fine, we're going to shove it down your throat. If you say yes, we won't kill you. But on the other hand, if you don't convert, we may wipe you out. And so it was pretty awful. And this was, think of all this time. This is in the 1500s. Think of all this time with all these explorers, right? Isn't that when, the Portuguese and the Spanish were starting to come to the North America, and were claiming land for their kings? And you have to remember, indigenous people did not understand ownership of land. This was a foreign thing to them. Their concept of land is, hey, you're here, we can travel around in it, we're going to, hunt the game, we're going to possibly grow some stuff, and use the waters, and we're going to live on it. But they did not own it. They didn't own it. They had lands, and you'll see maps of indigenous people where you'll see various tribal areas, but they didn't own that land. They used that land. On the other hand, Europeans' heads were all about, this is our land. Boom, right here, we're going to plant a flag. This is our land. And so now we own it. And if you come on it, we're going to go to war with you because we own this land. And that's kind of was the thought process. It was entirely a cultural difference. This is a justification of the Crusades, and I threw this in. The church established a worldwide papal jurisdiction in which the legal responsibility of universal Christian commonwealth, justifying the holy wars by Christians against the infidels. Pope Innocent in 1245 writes a legal document that Christian warfare against non-Christians is justified and that Christians may dispossess pagan principles of peoples of their land. So this goes way back, this whole thought process of the doctrine of discovery. Now I've got a glitch. Okay, to see where I'm going. Okay, so bear with me. Okay, this one of the things that does, it interprets Christ's instruction to Peter as feed my sheep. It's legal for Christians to occupy land invaded as the Pope's jurisdiction over all men. And remember, the Pope also was a political force and had armies, okay? And they had, wealth. That was another part of it. Because after the Romans were, after the Rome fell, what was left? Well, what was left was the Catholic Church, which became what was the law. So these were just wars in defense of Christianity. Pope Innocent in 1400s discusses the rights and status of infidels in a dispute between Poland and Teutonic kings. This is all through Europe. Pagans have the right to property, self-government, but they should not stray too far from European norms. And it ultimately, Spain and Portugal have great license for colonizing Africa and the New World and seizing lands and rights of Christians. And those were two very powerful forces. Spain was all through Central and Mexico, America and Mexico. And if you look at any maps, you'll see that, Spain was all up into like Colorado, it was all the way up into our country. So when we think of, you look at all those areas, they were very involved and owned these places and all the missions. Think of all the Catholic missions that were Spanish. And what were they there for? Well, they were there for several reasons. One of the reasons was there was gold going on. And, so that was another piece. They wanted to exploit some of that. Portugal was a strong force. And we think of Portugal as having great beaches and stuff now, right? Everybody's trying to go to Portugal because it's a really nice country to go visit. But back in the day, Portugal was a pretty good, tough place, tough people, all the way down into South America. If you go to South America, you're talking about, they're all speaking Portuguese. Yes, Ernie.
You mentioned the line that one of the popes drew, and that real significance was Spain got to the west, Portugal east, which is why Portugal settled Brazil, which is the largest speaking Portuguese country.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. And that all goes back to that. We don't think of that. We don't think of that kind of thing. But yes, it all goes back. So there was tremendous competition between Spain and Portugal. One of the things was the control of the Canary Islands. This was a big deal. Portugal's right to discovery must convert the islanders on behalf of the papacy. Spain must look elsewhere for lands. So they couldn't, because of that line we're talking about, they were given jurisdiction of the land and the peoples of the Indies by the popes. In 1490s, Ferdinand and Isabella sponsored Christopher Columbus to the Indies. And this is where he first enters, North America. And as I said, he was a pretty brutal dude when you read the history about Christopher Columbus. So the doctrine of discovery stood for 4 points. One was the church possessed the authority to grant Christian kings title and sovereignty over indigenous people and their lands. That was the first thing. Another thing was the European exploration, conquest, and colonization was designed to assist the papacy in exercising its guardianship over its flock. And so they wanted to control. They wanted to, it's political, it's financial. Think of it. Nobody does anything if it's not politically and financially expedient, right? I mean, really, money's a big motivator. Portugal and Spain held exclusive rights over other European countries to colonize the world. And discovery of these lands by Portugal and Spain gave exclusive rights to the possession and ownership of these lands. So those were kind of the people in the New World. So from Christian roots to secularization of the journey from Europe to the US is American articulation in Johnson versus McIntosh. And this was a case, and I hope I can do it justice here. But what happened was, if I go back through my notes, Johnson versus McIntosh was a court case that was involved the purchase of attempted purchase of land in Indiana and Illinois from the Piankashaw Indians. And okay, I'm going to scoot us ahead. So the U.S. Supreme Court interpreted in 1823 interpreted discovery to mean when European Christian nations discovered lands unknown to Europeans, they automatically gave sovereign property rights in the lands. This was so even though indigenous people had occupied and used these lands for millennia. Whoops, go back one. So they've used it, but they didn't own it, okay? The rights were given to the Europeans. And what it says is, in 1823, the U.S. Supreme Court interpreted discovery to mean that when European Christian nations discovered lands unknown to Europeans, they automatically gained sovereign and property rights in the lands. This was so even though indigenous people had occupied, the real property right was subject only to the continuing use and occupancy rights. So they could use it and they could live there. They didn't own it. So this Piankashaw Indians, I may have a slide here, I have to look. These private landowners, the Philadelphia and Baltimore land speculators attempted to get title to the land from the Piankashaw Indians and have these purchases legislatively recognized, but the Supreme Court under Justice Marshall denied them because the companies had no recognizable title. The Piankashaws had no title to convey as the title had passed to the discovering European sovereign, Great Britain. So they had used it, lived there, were about it. They didn't own it. And so they could not sell it. And that's kind of what has happened as a cornerstone of the concepts of the original Indian title. That's one of the ways that they were able to move the Indians, the natives, off of all the land that the government came by because they didn't own it. They had used it, but this was the reservation thought process. This is how they could move all these people. They did it to look at what happened with the Cherokees. They moved them all out of North Carolina, moved them to Oklahoma. They moved all the Plains Indians to reservations. The Rosebud, Pine Ridge, Standing Rock, all these places where they moved everybody out because they didn't own the land. Why did they do it? Well, the reason why they did it is because they were having white settlers coming in and they wanted the land. So the government was able to do this because of this court case that the Indians didn't really own any rights to it. Yeah.
When was the court case?
1823. So they kind of, because remember, there was a civil war that got fought in there, right? So that, you know, everybody was kind of busy with that. After that, they started the Indian Wars. That's how my 1888 relative was up in, you know, on the Pine Ridge or in Chadron, Nebraska, getting that pipe bag because they were now all on the reservations. They'd all been moved off, and they fought a lot of wars there. The Indians, you know, fought valiantly for their property and the right to be where they were, and they were removed. So they were admitted to be the rightful occupants of the soil with a legal and just claim to retain possession of it and to use it according to their own discretion, but their rights to complete sovereignty as independent nations were necessarily diminished. Their power to sell it to whomever they pleased was denied the original principle. Now, if I go back here, I think this one slide about the English. The English came, of course, as you know, later on after the Spanish and the Portuguese, but they came, and that was the East Coast where we are now, right? So they came here, and Queen Elizabeth was kind of involved in this. Remember, there was a Reformation that took place where the Catholic Church now, all of a sudden, you know, King Henry VIII, it was her grandfather or father, her father. She was, he became a Protestant because, you know, he killed her mother, Queen Anne Boleyn. So he, in order to have that, you know, for that, he wound up, she became the heir, she became the next queen. And so she saw that there was, I'm sorry, I'm like fudging here, but she saw that there was a real political and economic reason for the Great Britain to come here. They'd also fought the Scots, and they had deported a lot of the Scottish people to Ireland. So that's where you get, and it's not Scotch Irish. Don't talk about that. Scotch is a drink. Okay, it's Scots Irish. The Scots Irish, you know, that's Northern Ireland where the Protestants were. A lot of those folks came over and came right here to where we're standing in Chester County, and that's part of the story about Indian Hannah. So the Protestant Reformation had a great impact on this, and of course they were very righteous about how they, you know, wanted to save the infidels, you know, save souls to Christ and all this other. There was also part of this with manifest destiny. And this is really important. I love, my daughter picked that slide. Don't you just love it? About this angel of God walking across the plains. Manifest destiny and played a large role in the materialization of the doctrine in the US because we felt entitled to go out and take this land. You know, think of Oklahoma, think of what they did in Oklahoma with the great land grab in, I think, 1880 or something like that. It was this great land grab where everybody lined up on a line, and they shot a gun off, everybody took off and went and planted their stake, you know, for this. Now, whose land was that? Well, it was the Kiowa, the Pawnee, it was all their land. But, you know, it didn't matter. It was free land. This was free land. Okay. Since these principles established in Johnson have remained in the cornerstones of the concept of the original Indian titles, it explains how the discoverer gained governmental powers over the native peoples and their governments, which restricted all the tribes' international, political, commercial, and diplomatic powers. The transfer of rights was accomplished without the knowledge or consent of the native peoples. Johnson has been known all over the world and has impacted all indigenous people. So that's something that all over the world, that's been sort of the standard. 1887 Dawes Act, what was that? Presbyterians joined other religious denominations to support the Dawes Act, which was a law under which the greatest loss of native lands occurred and made the reservations. Presbyterian mission workers often foreshadowed the movement of Euro-Americans to native lands. What happened was missionaries would go and start a church. Let's say they'd start a church and they'd bring their followers. Well, then, when they're bringing their followers, that opens it up for whites to come in. And that's what happened. The settlers came in. And then, the whole picture would change. And what had once been, say, a native compound and sort of, trading post and all that, now have had these people who are invading them. I mean, you've seen pictures. I know you've all seen movies and pictures of, the wagon trains heading west. That's what this was. And Presbyterians, a lot of times, were in the forefront of that. We were complicit in aiding that without considering the fact that this was not native stuff. The Dawes Act opened the ways for federal government to declare all unallotted land for sale. 90 million acres of land. 90 million. Presbyterian presence, we were complicit in this assimilationist policy and manifest destiny, yes, but there are stories of resistance to serve as models to us today. Now, I only quoted a couple of them. There's a whole bunch more where Presbyterians stood up for Indigenous rights. Samuel Worcester in 1778 to 1859. He was a man who translated the Bible. Oops, I got a spelling error. Into Cherokee language. There was a native person, I can't say his name now, who had developed a whole alphabet for Cherokee language, and Samuel Worcester had translated the Bible into their language, and he protested their movement, and he was jailed for this. For disobeying a Georgia law for restricting white missionaries living in Cherokee territory without a state license. So he was a Presbyterian who stood up. Obeying the law would be surrendering the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation. Of course, we all know what happened. That was the Trail of Tears. That's how they all got to Oklahoma. Of course, if you've also read the book about and the movie about Oklahoma, where they discovered oil on that land, all of a sudden the Cherokees became really wealthy, and that was what that what is it? Something of
Flowers of the Killer Moon.
Yeah, Flowers of the Killer Moon was. That was what that whole book's about, because it's exactly what happened. That was historically accurate. So it isn't until you find out that there's some value to the land that, okay, because otherwise, there was you couldn't really grow anything on that land. They were kind of stuck, and that's where all the people like my ancestor came in, because they were supplying all the goods for those people. Okay, so Dirk Lay was another guy. He was an advocate for the Pima people. He was a missionary, and he was responsible for the legislation for the Coolidge Dam, which restored water to the people, which had been taken by white settlers. Water rights, we're in a drought, and it's a bad deal, but out west, water is like huge. And if you don't have water rights, you're going to die, because there's not a lot of it. And so he stood up for them in the early 1900s. And then there was also one that was self-development for people of the North Slope Borough in 1972, when they discovered oil up in Prudhoe Bay. So whenever you discover something that's of value, all of a sudden, it's like the government wants it or whatever, or developers want it. That's one of the things I'm so concerned about now, because they stopped all the drilling in the Arctic. Guess what? That might start again, and that's a really bad scenario, environmentally. So we have not only just a land rights scenario, we're talking about environment. The Presbyterian Committee on Self-Development of People, awarded by a Presbyterian Self-Development of People, support the Inupiat Eskimos. And the Santa Fe and Mount Tabor, there's a presbytery, sold a camp back to the people of Laguna, which was to return to the Pueblo to its original Aboriginal lands, which is a lot of people are starting to do. A lot of churches who have owned property are starting to sell it back to the people who it belongs to, really. You all remember Standing Rock, right? I don't think I have to explain too much about that, but what they were trying to do was put a pipeline underneath the Missouri River And that's a major source of the water for the Standing Rock Reservation. And those people, and you can see the picture there, those people stayed out there for I don't know how many days. Well, it was a long time, but it was a year-long fight to get that to stop, because they could see that if there was a break in that line, there goes their water, and that's their life. So that's kind of a big deal. Now, the United Nations has declared, they have a declaration of the rights of Indigenous peoples, and that's part of what I think motivated some of this, or we were involved in some of this with our church. There it is right there, and it talks about what is all involved about lands and security and religion. You can't see that too well, but that's a poster of it. And they formed a committee for a clear shift of the paradigm from colonial doctrines, which is what we're talking about here, to a principled human rights framework consistent with the United Nations. This has been a very important piece of what I think is the right.
Now we see everything that's going wrong.
My daughter
with the world and those who lead it. We just feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it. So we keep waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. Waiting on the world to change. Waiting on the world to change.
So, anyway, we're waiting on the world to change. And I'm sorry I haven't done a lot, really well on this today, I don't feel. But I would suggest you go back and read, if you're interested, go back and read that whole thing on the website, because you'll be amazed. And I left out a lot of the details that I intended to put in, but I don't want to keep you that long either. So thank you.
And have you handed out the
Let me hand this out. This is the Doctrine of Discovery. And yeah, thanks. Any questions from anybody, or any points you want to make, or anybody?
I can tell you, I went to Connecticut as project manager, and the government gave the Indians all this land. They were able to get a casino built.
Yeah.
But the rest of it was all supposed to be for housing, and it was all rock.
Right.
We were sent up there to build the houses, couldn't even get the roads in.
Right.
Couldn't get the utilities, so we turned around and gave them land.
Oh, my
It
goodness.
was basically useless.
Right. And
Thank
that's very typical of what's been done.
I think it's a one sheet.
For the last 200 years.
All the people who worked in casinos were supposed to move into the houses,
Right.
and there was a ton of it. And they could only get so far, and they couldn't do anything with it.
I think we went to a museum that was next to a casino.
Yeah.
Amazing
In
museum.
Connecticut.
Yes, in
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Yeah, I've been there.
Amazing museum. Making very clear the I don't know, deals is the right word, the wrong word, between the colonial developers and various conflicting native peoples who
Right.
were fighting against each other, and
Right.
because they were fighting against each other, it was to the benefit of the English people.
That's exactly.
I mean, but it brought out abuses that they're not in our history books.
Well, people are people. And, if you think you're going to make a lot of money or have political power over something, then you're going to go there. So there's always been infighting in tribes.
In churches.
And churches. Yeah.
They lost a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
I
Right.
mean, just a short bit of road they got in was $600,000.
Right. Right.
I mean, it was really sad that we gave that land to them and it was useless.
It's useless. Well, that's what they thought in Oklahoma they did too. They thought that it was useless. It was, it's prairie, it's just blowing, tumbleweeds and all this. And then they found the oil. And all of a sudden, it's not. And the Indians own it all. And then they start knocking them off one by one. And they did, literally. So that story is quite an interesting one. And it's true. That's happened. I think back about, if you remember, well, you remember Wounded Knee, right? Remember what happened at Wounded Knee? Okay. The Wounded Knee massacre that happened in the 1800s. I've been there, up on the, actually Liza was 8 months old when she was there. So I said, you were there too, you know? So if you go there, and it's this great big, it's a great big, sort of almost looks like a trench. And there's 350 people that are dumped in there, that were just mowed down by the army. And some took off, and there's a lot of stories about how some people were able to move and tell the story, because that's one of the issues. If you wipe everybody out, there's no story to tell, but they were. Up there also is a church. And if you remember back in the 70s, you go way back into the 70s in your mind, there was a stand at Wounded Knee, okay, where these folks came in. There had been a tremendous argument in the tribe over a guy who was politically kind of affiliated with the white thugs around in the area, and it had political power. And they were going around literally and beating a lot of people up, murdering a lot of people that did not go with them. And so there was a whole group of people that got together and said, we're not going to have this. How do we make a stand against this man? Because he was elected as a tribal elder, which was terrible. He's very corrupt. And so what they wound up doing was they were going to go to the Rosebud. They were on the Pine Ridge, and they were going to go to the Rosebud. They said, no, they're going to expect that. Where do we go? They said, we're going to go to Wounded Knee. And that's when they made a stand up at Wounded Knee. And they were there for 67 days. It was quite an amazing thing. The federal government got involved. The FBI was involved. I mean, everybody was involved in this thing because they put up a fight. And that changed what the political nature of that particular tribe, the outcome of that was, because then they started to uncover some of the things that had happened. This that I'm wearing today, this is a red hand. I'll talk more about it next week, but if you know what the red hand stands for, it's missing, murdered, and Indigenous women. The statistics on it are huge. And if you ever see somebody, and I'll bring some stuff next week or 2 weeks, with a red hand across somebody's face, usually a woman's face, you'll see a picture of that. That's what this is. Women, of course, are not considered as valuable as men. Surprise, surprise. And even though sometimes they're a matriarchal society, but they're not considered, they're considered people who can be used, abused, whatever. And so the women, and it's statistics on it, I'll get more current statistics on it, are astounding. These people just disappear. All of a sudden they're just gone. Where'd they go? Their daughters, their mothers, their single women, but where did they go? Well, nobody knows. Isn't that something? They just disappear. And so they're missing, murdered, and Indigenous women. And they just disappear, and nobody looks for them. The police don't bother. Nobody really is too worked up over it. So there's been a whole uprising in the Native community about this situation and what they can do, and they're publicizing it more and more. Out of Lame Deer, I've been in contact with a woman out there who runs an agency, because sometimes when they do find these, and a lot of times they're young girls, they find these girls, and they really have a lot to get back to being normal again, since they've been abused pretty bad. The alcohol rate on reservations is huge. Drug rate on reservations is huge. Why is that? Well, you have a very depressed group population, and how do you make money? We know from inner city how you make money, right? You sell drugs. I mean, that's what happens. There's no jobs. There's no way to better yourself. So that happens a lot. But this is quite a story. And then a guy by the name of Joseph Brings Plenty, who's from a reservation out there. His son was just murdered this past year. Anybody watch Yellowstone? Watch Yellowstone? You see Mo, the character Mo. Well, that is his name. His name is Mo Brings Plenty, and this is Joseph's cousin, who's on the show. And the son of Joe, or of Joe's, Cole, was an actor, very handsome kid, looked very much like Mo. And they were, he was in the show, he filmed a couple episodes, and he was going to school in Lawrence, Kansas, and he was murdered. And so they found his body like 3 days afterward, found his car first and then him. It's a very sad story. This happens all the time. We don't hear about it here. It doesn't make national news. We don't hear about it. This happens all the time. What are we doing as Christians about some of this stuff? I don't know. Anyway, with that uplifting note.
Thank you for coming.